Lighten things up, you know, for a minute. So in your program, Criminal Intent, the Center for Fiction, which I want to thank for asking us to do this, the little blurb says that bestseller lists in America are dominated by crime fiction these days. What's the attraction to murder and mayhem? And so I thought I would ask the group here, what do you think is the attraction of the reader to murder and crime? And I will start with Susan Isaacs right here.
Okay. There's relatively little mayhem in my work, but there is a fair amount of murder. My first novel, Compromise of Positions, I killed off, clearly irrelative, I killed off a periodontist on the theory of who best deserved to die. And I've been having that pleasure ever since. What I think in the standard whodunit, it's an extremely comforting genre because it shows a world thrown out of balance, out of moral balance with a murder. A life is taken, and it's all about the quest of finding justice, of finding whodunit and giving some form of justice, either bringing the perp to to the hangman or something of that equivalent, or simply deciding I'm going to let the perpetrator go. And so it's a very especially in a world gone slightly amok, it's a reassuring small universe in which, even though there are outrages, that somehow either goodness or knowledge will triumph.
It's interesting that Susan talks about the comforting world of the crime novel, right? But I think it is in many ways because of that whole thing that at least one tends to expect, I think, in crime novels, that good will prevail. So Persia, what do you think of that? And then what attracts the audience, the readers?
Well, I'm not going to speak for anyone else. I was a reader before I became a writer, and I know what kind of mysteries I'm attracted to, what kind of stories in general I'm attracted to. I'm attracted to stories about people who look normal or sane on the outside and have some insane drive on the inside. The evil that lurks within, the banality of evil on the outside. How there could be a murderer sitting in this room right now. We can't read each other's minds. That's right, look at each other.
Yeah.
Wonder. Or there could be a murderer lurking inside of you under the right circumstances. Susan talks about how, in general, when we are not the perpetrators, we think of murder mysteries as worlds in which, or we think of crimes in which, we think of murder mysteries as controlled environments in which someone's world or some moral code is thrown out of whack and then it's brought back in sync. But if you actually think about it from the perp's point of view, the act of murder or crime, whatever they're committing, is their effort to bring their world into order. And that's not to say that I defend someone who commits a crime against society, but I do like to explore that. For me, that's an important element of a well-written book, and in line with the question that was raised, I do think that's one of the things that brings an okay mystery to a higher level, where at some point someone has to, a little dark voice in us says, well shit, if I had gone through that, I might have done it too. That's my answer.
Peter Blauner. Peter, why don't you take that?
Well, I agree with what both Susan and Persia are saying. That I think part of the traditional appeal of the mystery is that it allows you the vicarious intensity of going into the world of crime, and then it gives us a way to close that off traditionally in a way that feels safe and satisfying. For me personally, that has not been the attraction of crime fiction at all. It's actually been the music of the writing itself is what really attracted me to it. I remember when I was young, there was a film version of Raymond Chandler's The Long Goodbye that came out, and it was cast with Elliot Gould playing Philip Marlowe, which was an offbeat choice. And it came out, I think, in 73 or 74, and throughout the movie he keeps saying, I don't care, it's fine with me. He affects this kind of indifference to the world, and then you realize, even though he never says it, that he does care. And there are certain things that he does care. And then when I pursued that and picked up Chandler's book, everybody else in 8th grade was reading, J.D. Salinger, and I was reading The Long Goodbye. And there was a sonic quality to it that I loved. And Larry has not quite the exact same style as Raymond Chandler, but I feel comforted by the rhythm of that prose style. It's a very solid American, rhythm that you get from that, and that's what attracts me. And I think maybe unconsciously a lot of other readers to the genre.
Janet, address the question of why people read crime fiction. It's tricky. Everything that's been said is valid, but I don't know that it quite answers it altogether. When Susan made the point that in crime fiction things are resolved and it works out and that, well, that's really not the hallmark of noir, where nothing works in anybody's life. So that there are all kinds of worldviews and things may be resolved or not. I think maybe, and also the canopy of crime fiction is an enormously broad one, and just about every kind of novel fits under it. There are books that are essentially romantic comedies, but there's a crime at the center of it. There are books that are dark contemporary fiction, but there's a crime at the center of it, and so on. And I think the common denominator of the crime at the center of it gives the reader a compelling reason to turn the pages to find out what happens next. It raises the fictional stakes to a degree that it matters. The problem is who killed the professor's wife, not will he get tenure.
Yeah, I was reminded of, actually when Persia was speaking, of Joan Didion said something along the lines of, which tends to be true, that the majority of murders are committed within the family or by someone you know, and it gave her pause to go to those Christmas and Thanksgiving dinners. It's funny that there within crime fiction there are so many subgenres as you bring them, and I hadn't been thinking about when I made my comment about noir, which we just talked about, and how noir often ends so badly. It's part of it, it's the end of Chinatown, which is my favorite neo-noir, of Faye Dunaway not getting away but getting killed, or I think everybody here, nobody here rather, writes in one of the the subgenres in crime fiction. I'm thinking in my head of, hard-boiled and cozies, which I discussed once with a writer, and she said I didn't like the idea of people killing someone and then having a cup of tea, so I didn't really like that, or noir, any of that. But what strikes me is that I wonder why in this country, as opposed to, let's say, in Europe, I know in Germany and France, crime fiction is considered along with literary fiction. When my books are reviewed in Germany, I'm on the cover with, Paul Auster, and the conversation is about both of us. So why here in America is crime fiction a kind of sub-genre? Anyone's comments on that? No thoughts about it at all?
Well,
you know, in England, you had some splendid writers, and Peter was talking about, you know, fiction like Chandler, like Larry's, that has a certain sound, but there were a lot of the original Pulp Fiction was not necessarily brilliantly written, and was published in pulp, in magazines, and so it was considered separate. I don't know, and I think certainly we've broadened it, and some of really great American writers going now are writing a lot of mysteries, from Scott Turow, Walter Mosley. I should be able to think of a woman, but it's all right. Yeah. I think initially there was that breakdown, and that was more for commercial purposes, and then as the appeal of the genre spread out, more and more really first-rate writers got interested, as they certainly did in England, but that was toward the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century.
Well, there are all these collections now of pulp, you know, that writers who were writing for, you know, a penny a word or something, and now people are looking at them as a kind of art form, as they, you know, and I think many of them are, some of them are not. But were you going to say something, Persia?
No, absolutely blank.
Really? Okay, so it's a terrible question.
No,
obviously.
I actually just
It's interesting, though, often I think it's what your first book was, people put you in a pigeonhole because of that. Because a lot of what is considered literary fiction, I look at these days and think, like, they're using some of the devices from crime fiction. I love Ian McEwan. I think he's a great writer. But a number of his books could easily be considered, you know, suspense fiction if you wanted to really go that way. The Great Gatsby, I was listening to an audiobook version, it turns on a crime. At the end, the guy's a gangster, #1, and I don't want to give it away, but...
Well, it's true of a lot of books that there's you know, that we all have mysteries, right? They're all secrets and things that propel books forward. But, you know, what I was thinking about and sort of asking you all was the idea of, which is going to lead me into this other question as to why you chose to write crime fiction initially, or if you just found yourself in that position.
I chose to write crime fiction mainly because I grew up watching those 1940s movies. It's such a really superficial reason, but that's what it was. I was sick at home. I was a sickly child. I had asthma. I stayed home a lot. And when I stayed home, I was glued to my television set watching 1940s black and whites. And I loved these stories about human violence, what people did to one another for the sake of love, for the sake of bettering themselves. And I've just always been fascinated by human drama. I studied acting for a while, and I'm too shy to be an actress, so I ended up being a writer. But when I write, I can't think of writing anything else.
Larry, did you always want to write crime fiction?
No, I just wanted to write anything, really, that would make me attracted to women.
Did it work? Are you still working at it? Is that why you've written so many books?
I've given up.
Well, it would seem to me after how many books? Like 50 books that, you know, maybe you need to try.
You know,
maybe you should try something else.
There's certain cultures with numbers that they don't have numbers after a certain figure, like 1, 2, 3, 4, more than 4. I've written more than 4 books.
And it's working or not working for you with the women? Just curious.
I'm still writing.
Yeah, I know. So we can say you're still trying. Susan, did you initially want to write crime fiction when you wrote Compromising Positions?
Well, I wanted to because I had been both an editor at 17 magazine, you know, how to say no to a boy. Never occurred to me, but I also had then been a freelance political speechwriter. And then I stayed home in the suburbs with my kids, and I was reading, you know, I probably became mad because I was reading 4 or 5 mysteries a week. And at some point it clicks in, I can do that, which I had never said about poetry or song lyrics. So it was a sign, and I needed to write. I think there was, you know, a little bit of that self-effacement, you know, who am I to write a real novel? You know, I'm not gaunt and haunted looking like Virginia Woolf or Joyce Carol Oates, and you know, I'm not glamorous like Jacqueline Suzanne. But you know, at least I could become a kind of Semitic Agatha Christie, and so that seemed possible. So I started when, you know, put my second kid on the school bus to go to what is now called preschool, nursery school, for 3 hours a day, set the alarm clock, and I started writing, and a character had come into my head, a suburban housewife. I had the dead Perry Dumpers. And it also was that it just seemed like this would be fun, because reading these books was fun. And indeed it was. Now, not all my work has been, you know, fiction. I didn't want to, you know, now I'm almost 35 years down the road of writing, and, you know, I could still be writing my Compromising Position goes Hawaiian. So I deliberately, my second book was more based on my experiences as a political speechwriter. They were, you know, the governor chokes to death on a commission. But other than that, nobody dies. And so I've gone back and forth from mysteries to non, but always back again.
Well, I didn't want to write one autobiographical novel and be done with my career. I wanted to be able to write about other people and figure out a way to empathize with them. And so being a crime reporter gave me a reason to be in people's homes. And every crime can be a rip in the social fabric that allows you to sort of go inside and see what's really going on. And once I realized that, I realized there was an opening to tell certain kinds of stories that I wouldn't have to read my own life to write about. Yet I could also be very emotionally involved at the same time. And it also gave me a way to organize that material. Plus the fact that I just like the writing itself. I liked a lot of crime fiction and stuff. So that's really what led me to it.
Mm. I would just very quickly, I didn't intend to write crime fiction. I had spent my life as a reader, and I always read what I considered a real book, and then a mystery, and then a real book, and then a mystery. And I came to realize that a lot of those mysteries were just as good, if not better, than some of those real books. But I was living in Rome, and I'm a painter, and I had lost 10 years of work in a fire, and I started writing a sort of biographic book about a mid-career artist who'd lost all his work, And I spent the year sort of doing that, and I came back to New York, and I hated the characters. I thought he was just like the whiniest, most obnoxious little twit. And so I killed myself on the page. I wrote like 20 pages of me being stabbed and shot and killed. And it got me going, you know, and I thought, this is great. This is a great thing to do. I don't, you know, I want to say this will bring me to like a sort of ridiculous question, and then I'll let you ask questions. But when I wrote my first novel, it was about a serial killer, and the question, I told that, and I talked about the book, and then the first question from the audience was, is this a memoir?